Welcome to Beyond the Call podcast, where we tell the stories of those people behind the jobs we rely on. We go into the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we shine a light in what can be a dark place. Just a warning, the content can be graphic and distressing, so please use your discretion. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform and our social media. And if you have feedback, I read every single one. Let's get on to this episode of Beyond the Call. Welcome back to Beyond the Call. We're on to part 2 of our talk with Nich. Nich has already given us a story where he started as a paramedic in Somerset, England, was still going through the ambulance stage, and he's also started to become a volunteer with the Glastonbury Music Festival. He was a volunteer with the medical services of that, and then that has turned into a full-blown festival charity where basically medical staff go and they volunteer their time. And the organisers would normally pay a private provider or an ambulance provider X amount of dollars, instead pay this to the charity. And then we were talking about where some of that money goes and some examples. But what I failed to do at the end of the last episode, I like to end every episode with a positive story. So, Nich, welcome back. Give me a positive memory of up to where we are now. So we're talking probably, let's say 90s, like the very early 90s and before that. Give me a positive story that sticks in your mind.
One from the Glastonbury Festival, actually. I had a report of a guy running across the top of a crowd. This is at night time, sort of 9 o'clock at night. It's dark, but there is a lot of light around. I was fairly nearby where this was reported, so I arrived there on foot, and there's a large crowd, 10 or 20,000 people, all progressing through a market area. And yes, lo and behold, there's a guy who is literally running over the top of the crowd.
Not crowd surfing, crowd running.
And I'm with some various other people have managed to get there to help me. We're trying to keep pace with him round the edge of the crowd. Then we suddenly see him stop and drop into the crowd. So we fight our way through, get to him, and he's deeply unconscious and not breathing.
Oh.
So we immediately start to ventilate him because he does still have a pulse. Just a few puffs, and he's wide awake, pushes past us and gets back up on top of the crowd with these wild staring eyes. We're in pursuit. We do this twice more.
Oh, wow.
Exactly the same sort of thing. But it's lengthening a bit each time.
In a few more breaths.
Before. Yeah. And eventually we managed to him and been taking amphetamines for 4 days solid, day and night, and got really scared because he couldn't even shut his eyes to try to go to sleep. He knew he was tired, but he just could not get there. So he'd taken a load of temazepam to try to put things right. In those days, jellies were still available. And the result was that this sort of, I don't know what you call it, schizophrenic state between the two personalities.
Yep.
Have
you done GHB overdoses?
Yes.
Yeah. That to me is what they presented as violent and unconscious.
Yes. And alcohol sometimes is like that as well. But this was in a class of it.
How did it end up then?
I decided that I didn't want to get a vehicle down there, which is always difficult in a crowd, and take him up. He needs to burn off some energy. So I got him to walk with me up to the medical centre, which is quite a long way uphill. When we got there, we managed to do it without him having another period of not breathing.
Yeah.
I was quite pleased with that. I wanted to keep an eye on him for as long as possible because you just never know quite when this is going to finish. So I said, would you like a coffee? And he said, oh, no, coffee's bad for you.
Oh, the irony.
Which is the most meaningful conversation I've had with any patient ever.
That's great. So let's go back to where we're in the early 90s. You're still working as an ambulance officer. You're still looking after the 4 stations?
No, I moved December 91 to Avon Ambulance, which is
Okay.
Bristol and around, much more city based. And I'm doing lots of projects, from helping to set up motorcycle ambulance responses. We had what we call difficult access rescue teams, now called hard teams,
Yeah.
but that developed later on. We also had a huge health and safety project on the second Severn crossing. It's a big 5 kilometre bridge.
Yep. It goes from Bristol to Wales.
There's an old one that was built in the early 70s, which actually goes from England to England, because it then couples up with another bridge which goes to Wales. The second Severn crossing was built in the early 90s, very complex structure, had all sorts of problems with it. And it's in a tidal estuary where you have an 8 knot current and tide comes in hellish fast.
Yeah.
Very dangerous place. So we did all the health and safety stuff on that. Loads of different control projects, and also played quite a role in the command and control software introduction and things of that kind. But I was also doing a fair amount about anti-terrorist stuff at that time, which had started off from contacts made at Glastonbury Festival. I did a thing called a special incident course, which is about all the nasty things in life. In 1993, I was invited by a long-standing friend to go to Pakistan. And the idea was that 6 of us would climb an unnamed, unattempted mountain peak just over 6,000 meters.
Had you had
Um,
any history of wanting to climb a mountain?
oh, yes, I'd been an avid mountain
Okay.
climber
Not this just wasn't a, by the way, do you want to go up a
since
mountain?
early times, and caving and all sorts of other things. So a bit of an adrenaline junkie in that respect. We got our act together and set off there. I took the sort of medical kit that I thought we would need, because it's a very remote location. And we went off so we flew into Islamabad, and then we took us 2 days driving to get to Karimabad,
Mm. What
um,
time of year are we
which
talking?
is July.
Which is there?
Quite hot.
Okay. Yep.
I think is the best term
Yep.
to use. But it's into the Hunza Valley, which is, I'm told, the original Shangri-La. Fabulous place, but pretty tough going. Then from Karimabad, we went another 1,000 meters up the valley side, and went into a side valley in what was the Kingdom of Nagar. It's still fairly autonomous. This is all in the disputed territory of Kashmir.
Yep.
And then we went on another half day from there, into a set of 5 villages, generally referred to as Hopar. Then, having got some help with porters, it was another 4 days to get up to the peak.
Is this something you guys organised on your own, or did you sort of go through
Yeah,
an organisation?
no, we organised this on our own.
Yeah.
And
This is
yeah,
pre-internet, pre-online stuff. That would have
this
only
is
just been coming out, wouldn't it? 90.
back in the days when a fax machine was really useful.
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
mobile phones were only just coming out then, like proper for
yes,
everyone.
yeah, certainly not in. I mean, when we were in Pakistan, I remember when we came down from there, we actually managed to go to a place that had a phone so that we could phone other people in Pakistan.
Yep, yep.
But anyway, we had a good time. But part of that, one of our guys had to come back earlier than the rest of
Mm.
us. So I actually walked down with him.
Was that pre-organised, or something happened?
We knew he had to go back early. I walked down with him so he wasn't alone. Then I went back up to Hopar to wait for the others to come back down.
Yeah,
I was 4 days in a devoutly Shia village on my own,
yeah. Did
which
they,
was
did they speak English?
no.
Is it Pakistani? What's the native tongue?
There's some Urdu spoken there, but there's also unwritten languages
Right.
because any remote place has unwritten
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are people who spoke English, could translate, and so on. The big thing there was it was devoutly Muslim to the point where I think some Dutch people have visited 2 years before and taken some photographs, including women, and the women have been stoned to
Yeah.
death as a result of that. I was very careful.
Yeah.
Photography is a great thing for me. So, how I got around that was I actually employed some young boys to carry my camera for me. They were under instructions from their elders to only give me the camera if there were no women around.
That's very smart,
But
because it's
um,
something that we just don't think about, and you don't mean offense. And as we've mentioned previously, it's about respecting the culture that you're going into. It's got
yeah,
nothing to do with us, what their
yeah,
culture is. So if you disrespect them, that's on you.
yeah.
And you wouldn't think twice about taking a photo. And even if there was a woman in the background, you wouldn't be taking a photo of the woman, but you just wouldn't think.
No, no,
Yeah,
it's the perception that
yeah,
it counts for everything.
yeah.
But one of the things that I also did, we had loads of medical kit which we hadn't used,
Okay,
and I wanted to donate that. Now, they had a dispensary, I think is the term that they used there, very, very basic care, and entirely staffed by women, so nurses. I
okay.
think there were 4 nurses who worked there. So it was difficult because I wasn't allowed to go and speak to
I
them.
was just gonna say, like,
And I've got stuff to donate.
so is it only women that are allowed into these dispensaries to collect the medications or whatever it might be that they're collecting?
The women can, so say somebody's got a large cut on their arm, they can go in and the women will treat that. But you can't just sort of go in and say, "Can I speak to one of the
It needs to be
nurses?"
like a
So,
purposeful, yeah,
so through contacts that got us the porters and so on, I was able to get an audience with the imam and some of the elders, and I explained what I wanted to do, and it was arranged. So went to this really strange. It was after dark, and I was taken to the dispensary by older men. I was taken inside by one of them and sat. One of the nurses, face completely covered.
yeah,
It was a hijab
yeah,
rather than a burqa,
yeah,
but covered. And this is pretty much in the dark. You can barely see anything in there. And she sat behind a table on a chair, and we can speak through this man who's taken me in, who can translate.
yes,
So I'm I've laid out on the table the things that I'm giving them, and I'm running through what they are. So we get to I got a load of suture material, which even behind a hijab, you could tell that she was really excited to have some decent
yeah,
suture material
yeah.
of a whole variety of sizes and types. But then I came to the lignocaine I brought, and the question was, what's a local anaesthetic?
So they suture. That's, yeah.
They'd never sutured with local anaesthetic.
And that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? If you've never done it, do you want to start introducing it? Because then nobody wants to get it
Well,
done without it.
it suddenly made me realise that we think of medicine as being what we do,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily the same wherever you go.
So that
It's
was a
not
bit
the
of an
usual
epiphany
language.
moment for you.
And I'd had there was a woman who worked in the HR department at Avon Ambulance, and I'd found out talking about this trip that she and her husband were going to be in Pakistan, in Peshawar, in the north. So, working for a new body that had been set up called the Agency Coordinating Body for Afghan Relief. This is right at the end of the civil war in Afghanistan when things are looking up a bit. Relief is definitely required. So I travelled back to Islamabad and then up to Peshawar, which was quite interesting in itself. And I get there, and this is very much the frontier. It's at the bottom of the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan, and there's hundreds of displaced Afghans living around that. Pakistani government has got put in a large number of troops. I didn't quite realize why the Americans were so keen on Peshawar until it came out a lot later on, many years later, when I found that Gary Powers, who was shot down in his U-2 spy plane, had taken off from Peshawar because that was the best trip into the USSR. So, yeah, there was a huge military presence there.
It was a geographic
Absolutely.
advantage place.
Yeah, and there was 100,000 Afghans living in refugee camps around there.
What was their reaction to you? A white Englishman coming into their camp? Did
Well,
tourism at a term?
Charles McFadden, no, I mean, it's definitely not a tourist place at that time. Charles McFadden, Chris's husband, as soon as I arrived, he said, I need somebody to teach deminers first aid. So, but also, he took me into refugee camps and things of that kind. He was well known.
Describe a refugee camp. Describe what it's like, or what was the experience like for you?
Well, these ones were, bear in mind, they'd been there quite a while.
Yeah.
One of the things you'd notice straight away is all the roads were kinked at the ends so that police and so on couldn't see into them. This wasn't a refugee camp built by the UN, or it wasn't an official
Yeah.
refugee camp in that
Just
sense.
where
This
people
was
had gathered and
a,
made a
a pirate
commune.
a pirate camp.
Yeah.
The structures were actually better. I mean, they were built out of mud and they'd
They
grabbed
built it for
roofing timbers.
themselves by themselves.
Yes.
Did they have rule or law apart from Sharia law?
Yeah,
Was
I
were
mean,
they
yes,
governed as such?
yeah, they were self-governing in that sense. But yes, it's hard to say how effective or formal that was really.
What about food? Where did they
Um,
get their food from?
a lot of them were working, or there was food provided by government
Okay.
agencies. At one time, we went to a funeral. I think he was about 3 years old. This child had fallen into a deep frying wok where they were cooking street food to sell to maintain
Yeah.
themselves. It's a huge community,
Yeah.
quite an education to me.
Hmm.
But the demining bit of it, that was a huge step. I
What
was
do you mean
actually
by demining?
lifting anti-personnel
Yep.
mines. Between 93, that first introduction, and 95, when I was also back there, they did a survey of how many mines needed to be lifted to make the essential areas mine free
Hmm.
of the country. It came out at about 100 million mines.
Holy shit! How big an
Yeah,
area are we talking roughly?
Afghanistan's quite a big country.
Oh, so you're talking 100 million within the whole country? Okay,
Yes,
right.
but that's only the essential
Yes.
areas.
Yeah.
It,
Arid elsewhere.
it wouldn't have been half the
Yeah.
mines.
Yeah.
You know, it was a small proportion.
100
Just so
million
that,
Mines.
100 million. I mean, when you think, I don't know if you've ever seen, you know what a sycamore seed's like?
Yeah.
Has two
Yeah.
wings, yeah, and it flutters down so that they spread out
Yeah.
on the
I
wind.
don't think Australians wouldn't know what a sycamore seed is.
It,
Describe it.
it's quite a small seed, size of a pea, I
Yeah.
suppose. Two of them are joined together, each with a wing, a bit like an insect wing in
Yeah.
shape. They drop down off a tree and rotate.
Yep.
The wings aren't necessarily exactly the same length, so they flutter
Yep.
outwards and spread out.
Reminds me
And
of
that's the
those
way.
straw things you used to have with the wings that come out when you're a child and you used to rub them in your hands and then they would float off.
Oh,
Yeah, so
yes.
that type of thing in nature.
Yeah. Yes. There's a type of, they're bright green. So children are attracted to the bright colour. And they're
So
plastic.
they were targeting
And they have
children.
two wings and a little body in between. And the wings are made slightly asymmetric so that they'll flutter outwards. And they drop them 5,000 at a time from a helicopter. So they flutter out
So
and they
they're
go
not
up.
placed, just randomly dropped.
They're just dropped and spread over a whole area. They could go into watercourses, long grass, lodge in trees,
Yeah.
off the ground, on roofs.
I'm only
Um,
imagining that this is killing many people every day.
it doesn't
Oh, they
particularly.
maim.
They're very small. Yeah, I mean, mines are terror weapons, and these ones have a membrane and a liquid, and as they're soft, as the child squeezes one bit of it, the liquid goes through the membrane and that sets it off. No,
Why are they targeting children? Is it just for terror?
well, if you wanted to spread terror to a
Yeah.
population, what better way than to kill a few kids or maim
Yeah.
them?
Yeah.
These blow their fingers off and blinds them,
Yeah.
typically, because their arms are a bit shorter, so you don't need so much explosive.
Yeah. And you actually, as a terrorist, you gain more from maiming than you do from killing.
Well, this is a government, this is the Russians initially, but bear in mind some of these were Western designed,
Yeah. Yeah.
some of the different
There
ones,
seems to be
you
an
know,
ongoing circle in this cycle.
yeah, all sorts going everywhere, you know. But there was other mines, bounding mines that jump up and they're anchored to the ground with a little chain. As the chain comes tight, it triggers an explosive charge inside. It's about the size of a tin of beans. They got 3,000 pieces of chopped steel embedded in resin, and they fly out. Do you know the difference between high velocity and low velocity on firearms?
Yeah, yeah. It's
You
the shot
use
using the
in
shock
metric.
waves. Where Australia's metric.
Right, okay, so let's go 1,000 meters a second and above is high
Yep.
velocity, and handguns and so on will be below that.
Yep.
600, so yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. These bounding mines, the pieces come out at 2,500
It would just
meters
rip through
a
people.
second. Yeah, but they're only 3 grams,
Yep.
and I'm sure you know that off the mass times the square of the velocity is the kinetic
Yeah.
energy. They do nasty damage to your abdomen
Yeah.
because they've jumped up to that sort of height, and it takes two people to carry you away. But other mines were very small, like sticks almost, and they were designed to blow the teeth out of grazing animals.
So that then they
So you
died.
because all their animals had died.
I'm too dumb to be a terrorist. I'm too dumb to be a mastermind of this sort of stuff because there's such evil genius behind these things. To think of that is both evil and genius.
Yeah, I mean, when you actually go and people hand you one of these things with the fuse taken out, and you think this is a live mine,
Yeah.
or things like that, it really shakes you to your core. It does something to you deep inside.
Well, you're seeing the
Uh,
worst of what humans want to do to each other or can do to each other. I mean,
yeah,
and
yeah,
even within our own jobs, we see it, but it's not to that callousness or that scale. I can't put myself in that
yeah.
in
And
that.
you've seen people who've lost
Mm.
limbs. They're in their wheelchair or they've got a prosthetic leg. You have empathy with them. At one point, we did a little survey in Kabul, and one person in seven coming down the street was missing a limb. And at that point, you just start to give
It's
up.
all their version of normal, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's their version of
yeah,
our diabetes.
yes,
Yeah. So you
yeah,
said before when you were talking to the husband of Chris that he said you needed
yeah.
for help with the first aid for the deminers. So I presume by
Well,
that you're talking about people whose job is to go and clear them, and obviously they're getting injured, so they want to teach them first aid.
at that time, Halo Trust had people teaching Afghans to be deminers,
Yeah.
and the pay for a deminer was $20 a month.
Wow.
Okay, it's a long time ago, and that would probably feed you, but it certainly wasn't a fortune
Yeah.
for what they were doing. But there was a lot of support people, and everybody was at risk of these
Mm.
mines. If you're demining anti tank mines and you make a mistake, you certainly don't need first aid.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of need for emergency care for people.
What were they
What
doing for emergency care for these people to this stage? Like people missing limbs, and you can die from a missing limb. You can bleed out, and obviously infections and things like that. They just doing what they could with what they've got.
Yes,
Hmm.
one of the things that the first course that I taught, I was still in a Western
Yeah.
headspace, for want of a better term. I was on about penetrating wounds of the chest, puncture
Yep.
wounds, so on.
For us, that's going to be a knife
And
or a stick, basically.
shrapnel.
No, I'm talking about for us. You know,
Oh,
in
for
yeah,
us, yes. Yeah, yeah. Certainly at that stage in my career, I hadn't seen many because this is before people really started to stab themselves
yeah,
so
yeah,
much. um, I said, has anybody come across this? And every hand went up in the room. I picked on one of the guys, I said, can you tell me about? And he'd been in the family home when the Russians had bombed it from the air, and his brother had got a chest wound. And so he'd picked him up and taken him to hospital, carried him. But that took 5 days. And he described perfectly that his brother died when he was in sight of the hospital.
oh no,
But he described absolutely perfectly a tension pneumothorax.
yeah, yeah,
And I just thought, what am I doing here? These people know all about this.
yeah.
And, it really was quite shocking.
It's funny, isn't it? Everyone's version of normal is different. You know, in America, gunshot wounds are, there wouldn't be a paramedic who's been out for a year who
Mm,
hasn't been to multiple. There'd be a hell of a lot of Australian paramedics who've never been to a gunshot. You know,
yeah.
every culture and every society has their own, even within their own suburbs and cities. There's
I,
such
I,
variation of what is normal.
yeah. Well, I know it's jumping ahead a bit, but 2018, I think it was, or was it 19? 2019. I went to Haiti and volunteered with an outfit called Hero, Haiti Emergency Response Organization. When I got to the airport, but I didn't get messages and things didn't happen. So I arrived at the airport whilst a huge riot was going on all through Port-au-Prince.
Yeah.
I was met by a policeman who had my photograph because they couldn't come to pick me
Oh,
up
so then
because of the
yeah,
riot.
yeah.
I was shut in a police station in a cell for 2 hours whilst
For your own protection.
war
Oh my god! Yeah,
got shot at trying to get to the police station. I was picked up by an ambulance from Hero, and they took me to a hospital called Bernard Mevs because their staff hadn't been able to get into the hospital, and they couldn't get me to where I was meant to be going, but they got me to the hospital so that I could run an A&E department.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah. So they just dropped me in, and I had one unqualified nurse with me to run a department with 6 trolleys
During a riot.
during a riot.
And not a Western riot where we push and shove. This is a violent.
Oh no, and people are being shot in the street. Concrete blocks are being thrown into the hospital
Yeah.
grounds. You couldn't go out of the emergency department and stay for very long. You had to run out and get somebody and come back in. If you saw what I
Wow.
mean, it wasn't nice.
Yeah.
And I gave 14 doses of TXA in one night.
So I've never given TXA myself. We had it available, but
Oh,
I've
all
never
right,
given it.
right.
We only got it fairly recently. So for TXA is tranexamic.
Transexamic.
That's the word. Tranexamic acid, which is basically it's a clotting agent. So you give it to people, and it stops them from bleeding.
I'm going to correct you there because I can. What it does, it doesn't promote clotting, it stops the breakdown of clot.
Yeah, yeah,
So your own clotting factor, if you
does its
had
job.
something that promoted clots, they'd all die.
Yeah, yeah, that's what
This stops
heparin. Yeah,
your,
well, we use it over here. It's mainly used for, and I like the way you called it the gunshot med. Over here, we call it the trauma med because it's car
yeah.
accidents because we don't use it for much else.
One of the things in Haiti was if the patient had a green card to go to the States and they could vaguely walk, you put them on a plane to go to Miami. It's only an hour and a half's
Yeah,
flight, and then they could stagger off and go into Medicare.
yeah.
We call
Let's go
we
back to Afghanistan.
yeah,
We're going to go all over the place. We've still got plenty of stories to come. You started doing the courses to teach this first aid.
yeah.
Yeah. And
But
how long were you there between? So this is basically you're on holiday this first
yeah,
time. You
yeah,
decided to climb a mountain, and then you've gone into this place, and I'm presuming you had no idea what you were going into.
not really. The first trip was fairly short because I was on
Yeah.
holiday. I had to get back, and then I went
How
back,
did you
and
feel when you left? Did you know you were going to go back?
I knew that I had to do something.
Yeah.
I couldn't just leave that.
Yeah.
You know,
That would affect your
uh,
soul.
yeah. Well, yes, and what was I was a different person coming back.
Mm.
In '95 when I went, I had quite a long trip. I managed to fiddle the leave big time. And there was lots of things going on.
Can I just ask, when you went back to a Western ambulance station, how did
Mm.
I can imagine there would be a lot of resentment to how people take things for granted. Is that the case?
I didn't feel it so bad then
Okay.
as I did later on. That got really bad. But yeah, going back to the return and back to the ambulance service, by by '95, lots of things had gone on, lots of awful political upheavals in ambulance services in general, but particularly in Avon, where I was. So that when I returned from my second trip doing the demining stuff, I was actually out of a job. I was called in the day after I got back to be told that the chief exec who I worked for had left under difficult circumstances, shall we say.
Yep.
A replacement had been brought in, and he just got rid of anybody who had had anything to do with the previous chief exec.
Right.
And my response to it was actually, I was actually quite relieved because it meant that I could go back on the road.
Yep.
I knew that they had plenty of
Yep.
vacancies.
Yep. Yeah.
um,
Management's
so
not all it's cracked up to be much of the time.
I enjoyed it because I was benefiting patients. So it was great. But then I had considerable trouble going back on the road because there'd been some qualification changes and I'd missed the boat to redo certain bits. I had one particular training and development manager who stood in my way. I sort of had to have a formal interview with a panel, and it was chaired by a senior anaesthetist, and the training manager just said to me in the meeting, she said, I think you're burnt out and I don't think you'd stay the course. The anaesthetist actually interrupted her and said, that's absolutely none of your business. And I think you make a fabulous paramedic.
Good on him.
Uh, that was a turning point at a very low point in my life. I also had a sizable road accident where I'd been stationary in a queue of traffic, somebody driven into the back of me really fast.
Yeah.
I had terrible flashbacks to it and a lot of problems following that. Knowing that I was going to succeed was a huge benefit to me.
Yeah. If you're hopeless, then
Yeah.
it's that next step towards a really negative outcome. That hope, or that, I've always said, if you feel loneliness, worthlessness, and hopelessness are
Mm.
the three worst human emotions. And if
Yeah.
you combine all those three, then your risk of suicide is through the roof. And the fact that you had the hope is awesome. Did you get therapy? Did you reach out? Because this is a time where blokes didn't reach out.
Well, it was certainly difficult. And the road accident was outside of my
Yeah.
work. So it was difficult in that I was just coming back into to working, being on the road. And if I'd said I need some help, they would have provided it in Avon, I'm fairly certain. However, I would have been out of a job fairly
Yeah.
soon as a result of that.
Yeah.
You definitely had to be careful about it. I did get the help, and it was a guy in the Bristol Royal Infirmary who was blind. Quite interesting because his guide dog would come and greet you at the door and take you to his room.
Yeah.
The guide dog would curl up under his desk and we'd talk for 45 minutes. At the end of 45 minutes, the dog would get up because it knew it could tell the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't say anything. The dog would get up and he'd say, oh, I think it must be time. And the dog would take you out.
That is awesome.
um,
So was he a psychiatrist or
I No, he wasn't a psychiatrist. I don't think what his qualification was. I can't remember at this distance. But my particular problem was waking up with a very strange nightmare where it was complete and utter darkness in my dream. And
was this a recurrent nightmare? Yeah.
yes, and I woke up. Well, I couldn't tell whether I was waking up in the dream or waking up for real.
Yep.
They were both very real to me. I thought that I died. I was quite convinced of it. And I would go through this process many times a night, waking up in the dream and then for real
Yep.
going back to sleep and waking up in the and it was really quite difficult.
Yep.
And I could sometimes hear the sound of this crash, which was the whoosh and then the impact.
Yep.
No visual
Yep.
bit at all.
Yep.
Just hear the sound.
It's funny what the
Um,
brain remembers, isn't it? It can be a smell. For me, one of my big triggers is hearing keys rustling. When
I'll
people,
come back to
yep,
smell later on.
yep,
But this guy taught me a technique. He said, because this is back in the days of VHS, the video
yeah.
recorders, yeah?
So for these, that's the old version of a Blu-ray.
Yeah, very, yeah. But yeah, he taught me this. You have the best VHS in the world.
Yep.
And he said, you just got to find the pause button. He said, when that happens, hit pause and leave it there. Go back to sleep.
Yep.
And I found the pause button
You did.
and it's still on pause now.
Yep. That's awesome.
And I dumped it.
Yeah. There's different things that work for different people. I
Yeah.
did a PTSD course and they were talking about that you can actually re-script your nightmares. So you
Mm.
basically, when you think about it and these recurrent nightmares, The next time when you think about it, you actually just change one thing. Just very subtle. You just change one thing. And then the next time you wake up from it, you go over it again and change another thing. And eventually you rescript it. That works for people as well. There's no one size fits all, and there's a million different things. And I encourage everyone to try anything they need to till they get to the one that works for them, because nightmares and broken sleep is shit.
Yeah. But anyway, carrying on through the Afghan stuff.
Well, what we might do is end this episode. So I want you to end it, and then we're going to do part 3 with the Afghan and beyond. So let's go in Afghanistan. And this might be jumping into the future as well. Tell me a positive story from Afghanistan.
Yes, in that early stuff, came across a young lad. I'm not going to name him. He'd been walking with his father, looking after sheep or goats or whatever animals they were. And father had trod on a large mine, a proper blow-up mine, which had killed father at the scene and blown both this child's legs off. So he's lying in a bed and he's absolutely distraught at the death of his father. And he's also missing 2 legs, and quite high up as well. And he's, I think, 9 years old, something of that order. Later on, I met him again quite a few years later, and he was in the Kabul Orthopedic Organization's clinic.
Yeah.
They called KOO, K-O-O. And he was the receptionist. He was sat on the desk.
On the actual desk.
Right? On the desk. And I came in and I looked at him and he recognized me, right? And I suddenly twigged who it was. It obviously looked very different.
Yeah.
And he showed me his prosthetic legs by spinning himself around on the desk and dropping into his legs and coming round to give me a big hug.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it gets better because he's running this with a computer, right? And when I'd seen him, he didn't know how to read or write.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's managed to pretty much teach himself to read and write and how to use computers. And then I heard a bit later that he'd actually managed to get himself to the US and he got a scholarship, I think it was to Yale.
Oh. Wow.
So,
that's,
it really is amazing what people can do.
I was going to say, what a prime example of human endurance and just overcoming.
Yeah, and also, a message that, yes, we might have a few interrupted nights. And I'm not really trying to belittle it, but, when you view it in that context.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have it a lot worse than us. And, that is a bloody great story.
People can get there. It's just a real struggle. Yeah. Only you can do it.
Yeah. So how old do you think he is now?
He must be in his 40s by now.
Right. That's awesome. That is so good. You just wonder what he's doing now, and wherever he is, I hope things turned out all right. It's a bloody good story with only knowing the peripheries of it. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap this episode up. This has been an awesome story so far. There's more to come. Make sure you join us for part 3. Yeah, there's believe it or not, there actually is more chapters to this story. So, be on the call, Peter at gmail.com, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Call. If you like what we're about, please make sure you subscribe, and if you can leave a review, that would be appreciated. If you have feedback or suggestions for future guests, please contact me via my socials. Please share with your networks and help me expand my reach. It's a great privilege for people to share their stories and allow us to go beyond the call.